A lot of confused men incorrectly think that simply because they may be introverted or see themselves as odd or unusual, they are Sigma males. But being a Sigma male involves much more than simply being misinterpreted by the general public. Although the question of whether a person is born a Sigma male or develops into one is still hotly contested, there's no shame in aspiring to become one because Sigma males certainly have numerous advantageous characteristics that contribute to their silent dominance and mystique. I will thus be talking about 10 signs that you are not a Sigma male, regardless of whether you identify as a Sigma male or aspire to be one. Now let's get started. Number 1, you make excessive efforts to conform to a certain personality type. Each individual is distinct and possesses a certain set of attributes that define him. It is obvious when someone begins to contradict themselves to fit into a personality type they find attractive that they are not a Sigma male. Instead of focusing their life on becoming Sigma males, true Sigma males focus on being the finest versions of themselves. Overly rigid attempts to conform to a certain personality type ultimately impede an individual's ability to advance personally. The reason for this is that they may choose to ignore or repress aspects of themselves that don't quite fit the pattern. Because individuals are making too much effort to be someone they aren't, it also results in a lack of authenticity. Number 2, you have a strict personality. Although I frequently discuss the characteristics of Sigma males on my channel, it's crucial to remember that a real Sigma male will never exactly match every characteristic they read or see in videos. Even if you possess 90% of the characteristics that Sigma males display, you are still eligible to be a Sigma male even if you don't possess the final 10%. A fake Sigma male thinks you have to have every characteristic 100% of the time to be a real Sigma male. True Sigma males recognize that every individual is unique, hence they don't give a damn if they have all the characteristics or not. Everybody has a different life story, set of tragedies, set of hardships, and driving forces. Nobody can ever fully fit into a personality type, and those who believe they do are most likely false Sigma males. Number 3, you always have grand plans, but you never follow through. Setting high standards for oneself and working toward them are both necessary for personal development and fulfillment. Some people become paralyzed by their thoughts and fantasize about their goals without taking any concrete steps to realize them. Having a vision for the future is fantastic, but it's also critical to actively pursue those steps by breaking them down into manageable chunks. Your aspirations will remain just a far-off fantasy if you don't take action. Real Sigma males will follow through on their goals. If they have a dream, they will put in serious work to make it come true. Those who only discuss their objectives without taking any concrete action toward them are not considered Sigma males. Number 4, you look to other people for approval all the time. Genuine Sigma males do not require other people's approval. He is an independent man, self-assured in his goals, and capable of completing tasks. Since he doesn't require approval from others, he doesn't feel the need to prove himself. By pushing himself to do great things, a real Sigma male finds affirmation from the inside. A Sigma male places more significance on his achievements and sense of pride in himself than on other people's admiration or approval. You're probably not a Sigma male if you're always trying to convince people of how amazing you are. A genuine Sigma male doesn't make a point of announcing to his loved ones that he is a Sigma male. That's not something he feels others should know about him. Number 5, you have a narrow taste in things. When someone has snobbish taste in movies, music, art, or anything else, it may be quite irritating and unpleasant. These people can be contemptuous or even violent against others who hold differing views, and they frequently look down on those who don't share their preferences. This type of behavior shows a lack of empathy and understanding for other people in addition to being snobbish and exclusive. True Sigma males never put themselves first and appreciate other people's viewpoints. Number 6, you lack discipline and self-control. The idea of Sigma males is frequently connected to characteristics like nonconformity, self-sufficiency, and independence. However, a Sigma male's great degree of discipline and self-control is one of their most distinguishing traits. Sigma males are people with a strong sense of direction and purpose in life. They hold themselves to a higher level by exercising self-control and discipline. It's hard to be a Sigma male if you don't have discipline or self-control because these qualities are essential to the persona. Instead of being reactive or impulsive, Sigma males can remain composed and cool in any circumstance. They employ self-control and discipline to reach their goals because they have a clear idea of what they want to accomplish. Number 7. You give too much thought to how you seem. You're probably not a Sigma male if you strive to flex trivial things or worry too much about brand labels. A real Sigma man would rather have wealth than have wealth. This is a result of Sigma males' extremely practical ways of managing money and moving up the corporate ladder. They are aware that it is quite reckless to spend extravagantly on vehicles or apparel only to seem good. It is not simply a bad financial choice, but it also contradicts the core values of a company. Sigma males shouldn't feel the need to affirm themselves based on their attractiveness because they don't require approval from other people. This is not to suggest that Sigma males don't feel good about their appearance, they do, but it's for their benefit, not the benefit of others. Number 8. You believe that you are superior to all others. A fake Sigma male's inflated sense of ego will lead him to believe that he is better than everyone. Sigma males do not go around showing off their numerous strong and great attributes, even though this is true. True Sigma males are aware that everyone has strengths and limitations and that no one is better than them. A real Sigma male understands how to control his ego and prevent it from growing. It is not admirable to have a superiority mentality, and a true Sigma male does not place himself above others. Number 9. You constantly shift the responsibility elsewhere. The capacity to accept responsibility for one's actions and choices is one of the main characteristics of a Sigma male. These are people who accept responsibility for their errors, grow from them, and move on. However, you are not a Sigma male if you always place the blame elsewhere, refuse to accept responsibility for your actions, and lack the courage to own up to your mistakes. Number 10. Everything is seen in black or white. Seeing the world in black or white means that there is no opportunity for complexity or shades of gray in between. Everything is either entirely correct or entirely incorrect. Individuals who have a binary perspective are prone to rigid and unyielding ideas, which they use to assess individuals or circumstances without taking into account various points of view or interpretations. Thinking in this way might result in a limited perspective, intolerance for other points of view, and ignorance. Additionally, it may keep people from seeing the complexity of life and the range of different points of view that make up our reality. A real Sigma male is prepared to keep an open mind, is flexible in his ideas, and examines the world to draw conclusions that occasionally may err on the side of caution. Please let me know in the comments whether the points I stated in this video are ones you agree with. Check out some of the other videos on this channel for more content about Sigma males. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos if you want to be a wonderful person. It contributes to the channel's support. Click here to see the next video on your screen.